This debate is sponsored by Clean Elections, the state's nonpartisan voter education agency. My name is Danielle Lerner, and the way we're sharing this debate is part of a brand new effort to support democracy in Arizona. Thanks to a partnership with the Clean Elections Commission, the Arizona Media Association, and Bitfire Studios, we are working to make sure these 2024 debates are the most accessible in Arizona history. That means this will air on a long list of local TV stations, radio stations, and digital platforms, including support from local newspapers. Now, we have tried to keep the rules simple here. Each participant representing a perspective about this proposition will have 2 minutes to make an opening statement and 1 minute for a closing statement. Throughout this debate, I will pose questions to each participant, allow them to answer, and then make sure the other debater has a chance to respond. Whenever a question is directed to a specific participant, only their microphone will be open. At all other times, every microphone will be open. Now, this debate 7 referred to the ballot by the state legislature. We want to start with a brief description of the proposition. So on your ballots, Proposition 137 will be titled, quote, Proposed Amendment to the Arizona Constitution by the legislature relating to the Judicial Department, end quote. And the official description reads as follows. Quote, eliminates judicial terms and regular retention elections and nullifies the results of the 2024 judicial retention elections for Arizona Supreme Court justices, Court of Appeals judges, and Superior Court judges in counties with over 250,000 persons. Allows such justices and judges to hold office during good behavior until age 70, end quote. Explain the proposition. So let's introduce the participants who will be debating for or against this initiative. Retired attorney Andy Gordon from the law firm Coppersmith Brockelman will be arguing against the proposition, and Kory Langhofer, managing partner at Statecraft Law Firm, will be arguing for the proposition. Welcome to both of you, and thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Danielle.
For opening statements, we would like to ask each of you to explain the measure and why you are for or against it. So, Mr. Langhofer, you have the first opening statement. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Danielle. Judicial retention elections in Arizona don't work well. If this isn't your first time voting in Arizona, you already know this. On the back of your ballot, historically, there have been, in Maricopa County, about 30 different judges on the ballot. And you're asked they're not running against anyone. The question is just, do you want to retain this person or not? And the next one, do you want to retain this person or not? They're not running against each other, they're running against themselves in a way. If you're a lawyer, you get calls from your friends during election season all the time saying, who are all these judges? Like, who am I supposed to vote for? Because voters don't know them. They're not famous. They're in the media sparingly, but people don't know enough about the judges to make informed decisions. In fact, even my friends who are judges don't know all of their colleagues on the bench. So when you look at the results of the judicial retention elections over time, you see that only 0.3% of them lose. That's because the overwhelming majority of judges are doing a good job. There's not a reason to kick them out. Another big problem with the retention elections is they're so slow. It slows down the tabulation process. You've noticed that Arizona takes usually a week or so to finalize its elections. A lot of that's because it takes so long to count the votes for the judges on the back of the ballot and to correct the errors, which end up being at a higher rate for the judge elections than it is for, say, the presidential elections. What this measure does, Prop 137, is simplifies this. You're going to go from roughly 30 judges a year to, let's say, 2 or 3. But you're only going to have the ones on the ballot for whom there's some reason to question whether they're really doing such a great job. They will have, for example, been convicted of a felony or a crime involving dishonesty, or they would have been found by the Judicial Performance Review Commission, some citizens who review their performance. If they find that the judge isn't doing a good job, their name will be on the ballot. If you go from 30 names to 5 names, you can make intelligent decisions about judges.
All right, thank you. Mr. Gordon, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement.
Prop 137 is a terrible idea for at least 5 separate reasons, any one of which is sufficient to vote no, taken together, sufficient to vote hell no. Here are those reasons. First, as Kory acknowledges, it silences the voice of the people by taking away the people's right to vote on which judges to retain and which to remove from office. Secondly, it inappropriately gives politicians at the legislature oversight into what is currently a nonpartisan process by allowing the majority party at the legislature to put 2 of its yes men on the Judicial Performance Review Commission, the nonpartisan commission that currently reviews judges and make recommendations regarding retention. 3, it also encourages those politicians at the legislature to conduct judicial witch hunts, because it gives every legislator the right to demand that the Judicial Review Commission investigate any judge that politician believes has engaged in a pattern of malfeasance, a word that will mean whatever the politician wants. 4, by taking away the citizens' right to vote in all but the rarest cases, it gives the current judges lifetime appointments, leaving them beyond the voters' reach. 5, and if that's not enough, and perhaps most cynically, it would nullify this year's judicial retention vote, so that even if a majority of voters decide not to retain a particular judge, that judge will continue to serve. Our current system of judicial review and retention, largely designed and championed by our greatest judge, Sandra Day O'Connor, has served the state well for 50 years. It's a model system. Vote no.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gordon. Let's talk about how this proposition got to the ballot. Prop 137 the ballot by the legislature. It got the minimum number of votes from only Republicans to pass. So 31 in the House, 16 from the Senate. So Mr. Langhofer, I'll start with you. Is there widespread support for this measure, even in the legislature?
Well, the requirement is that you get a majority of the votes in the House and the Senate, and the bill got that. So it's not, I think, a good criticism to say it got the minimum. It got more than half, which is the standard. That's the same standard we're going to apply in the election that comes up. If this passes or fails by 1 vote, no one will say, well, the result was wrong. The question is, did you get enough? I think anyone who's voted in Arizona before and seen this lengthy ballot, and you know none of these people, and you can't find someone who knows the people, will tell you the current system isn't working that well. We've got to fix it somehow. Let the voters focus on the ones, the judges, who actually have some real question about their performance.
Mr. Gordon, how do you respond to that claim that this could actually help speed up elections and give voters more of an opportunity to make informed decisions?
Yeah, that strikes me as, oh, voters, don't worry your silly little heads about this. We'll take care of it. So we'll take away your vote for 90% of the judges, and you'll only get to see a few. The system has worked well. It's a model. And as the fact that it only got Republican support in both houses, it is clearly a highly partisan measure.
Now, you mentioned the Commission on Judicial Performance Review. Prop 137 would expand the membership of that commission to include 1 person appointed by the Arizona House and 1 person appointed by the Arizona Senate. It would also require the commission to investigate a judge or a justice if a state legislator makes allegations that a judge or justice is engaged in a pattern of malfeasance in office. Mr. Langhofer, does that put judges at risk of falling under political influence, or is that checks and balances?
I think it's, I think Andy and I can agree that it's important to have some oversight of judges. They have a lot of power over the people in the courtroom, so you need some oversight. And I think we both support the idea that a judge who's misbehaving, doing his or her job poorly, corrupt, God forbid, there needs to be oversight for that and a process to remove them. A process like that already exists. So the issues you're saying are the Judicial Performance Commission will go from 34 citizens, which is what we have right now, to 36. It increases very slightly, about, 8% or so. And that's hardly giving the legislature power of this process. It's dominated by citizens who are still going to keep exercising their oversight over the legislature.
And Mr. Gordon, the criteria is laid out. The public can still weigh into the commission. Is that enough oversight? Why or why not?
It's more than enough oversight now. The commission does its job very, very thoroughly. There's no basis I've heard of why to put nominees of the legislature into this commission. The question, or the right to demand these investigations, which would just bring the commission to a standstill, frankly. There is oversight, the voters. The voters have been able to vote on judges since statehood. It's not broken.
Okay, Mr. Langhofer, your response?
I agree that the commission already does a good job. And this measure keeps the commission in place. The commission, if they think a judge is misbehaving, remember 34 citizens, 2 legislative appointees, will still have the power to put someone on the ballot. And if someone files a dumb complaint against a judge and says he or she is not doing a good job, the commission can just say, we don't agree with that. They're not going on the ballot. They're doing a fine job. The commission's doing a good job. This doesn't disrupt that. It keeps their role in place.
Okay, let's talk about the timing of this as well. From the U.S. Supreme Court to right here in Arizona, it seems the judiciary has definitely drawn more of the political spotlight recently. Our current system has been in place for 50 years. So why is this something that Arizona does or does not need right now? Mr. Gordon, if you'd like to start.
It doesn't need it right now. I think it is an effort to make our system in some ways more like the federal lifetime appointment system. And frankly, that system is not doing us a good service at this point. This, I think, is an effort to keep the judges who are currently on the court, largely appointed by the prior governor, on the court and give them lifetime appointments. And we've seen at the current U.S. Supreme Court the corrosive effect of lifetime appointments.
Mr. Langhofer?
I just disagree about the federal judges. I think they're doing a great job. I love being in federal court. I think I've almost always gotten a really fair shake there. I'm distressed about what's happening in our politics now. Everyone's at each other's throats. And instead of saying, this judge ruled against me and he or she was doing a good job, I just think they got it wrong, I'm going to appeal, they say that judge is corrupt or he's biased. That's not right. And smearing judges' reputation like that and turning your rulings on a case into a popularity contest at the ballot box, that is going to have a very bad effect on the people who appear in court and need a fair shake. I think giving judges a presumption of lifetime tenure, like we do in the federal, like the framers of the Constitution did that, I think that works really well.
And you mentioned their fear of retaliation from folks that these judges are presiding over. Just to push back a little bit, 2 new positions on the commission, would there be concerns that the fact that legislators can now weigh in or bring complaints against judges? Do you think that might have a similar effect?
I've thought about that. Legislators and citizens can already weigh in. Anyone who wants can send a complaint into the commission or the judicial ethics folks, and it'll get a fair look. What this really says is that if a legislator files a letter like that or a complaint, that the commission has to do an investigation. It doesn't say what that investigation is. I think it's probably going to work a lot like the way bar complaint investigations work. Someone will read it, and if it says you should take this judge off the bench because his dog barks too loudly, they'll get to the end of the letter and that's the investigation and it's done. If it's serious though, they'll probably give it the weight it's worth and interview folks. I don't really see that as a fundamental change in the process. What is the fundamental change is we've got 30 people on the ballot. No one knows who they are. Take it down to the few who have real issues that are worth looking at.
Mr. Gordon, is there something to be said, again, for simplifying the process?
I almost never think there's something to be said for taking away people's rights to vote. I think Kory's view on the power of the legislators to start witch hunts is charitably naive. I think it'll have a terrible effect on the Judicial Performance Review Committee because they're going to, my view, get bombarded by legislators who don't like this decision, don't like that decision, and they are going to require that commission to spend its time investigating. Those are volunteers, and how we're going to get volunteers to work in that atmosphere is beyond me. That's why a number of Supreme Court judges and retired judges are all opposed to this system.
Mr. Langhofer, would you like 30 seconds to respond?
They're certainly not all opposed. There's a divide among the judges about what this looks like, and that divide tragically follows partisan lines for the most part. And I think that's part of what worries me about this. The judiciary is becoming politicized. Keeping them on the ballots and making cases popularity contests, that is cancerous, and we should be careful about letting that spread.
Mr. Gordon, would you like 30 seconds to respond before we move on?
Yeah, it's not. So it's not on partisan grounds. We did a webinar on this, and we had 3 former Supreme Court justices in opposition. Justice McGregor, appointed by a Republican, Justice Palander, appointed by a Republican, and Justice Bales, appointed by a Democrat. And 2 of them had been Chief Justice, and one of them, Justice Palander, who himself had been twice the target to being removed, who you would think would like this, probably spoke most eloquently at the corrosive effect this would have on the Judicial Performance Review Committee.
Now, you brought up the fact that if this would nullify the results of the retention elections on the 2024 ballot in counties with more than 250,000 people. So essentially all judges and justices would keep their post. We're talking a lot about keeping politics out of the judiciary. So Mr. Langhofer, right now 2 Arizona justices who played a substantial role in our state's 2022 abortion ruling are up for retention. How do you address claims that Prop 137 is essentially meant to keep them on the bench?
It's factually false. I was there for the drafting of this. I was at every legislative hearing on it. That all happened before the abortion case was ever decided. It's a good talking point because the issue polls strongly. People have strong opinions about it. This is before all of that. This was in motion beforehand. Fundamentally, if you have a controversial case like abortion, or 15 years ago we were dealing with gay marriage, right? These are like watershed social issues that people have very strong feelings about. The last thing you want, if you're in a court with a judge, you don't want that judge looking around saying, which of these sides is more popular? Which one's going to get me kicked if I rule against them? That would be terrible. We need judges to not be worried about who's popular, and that's what this bill does.
Mr. Gordon, your response to that?
Well, one correction of what Kory said. The bill actually passed after the 1864 abortion decision came down. What the bill does, and I know I'm repeating myself, is some voters will just follow the recommendations of the Judicial Performance Review Committee, but some voters have very strong feelings about the appropriateness of that decision. This will take away their right to vote on a judge regarding that, which is a right they currently have.
Now, going along with that, actually, only 6 judges have been turned out of office since the system was implemented, and half of them were in 2022. So we've seen that increasing certain organizations, by political action committees, to explicitly campaign for or against retention of certain justices. So, Mr. Gordon, with this movement toward more aggressive action, aggressive campaigning, times are changing. So does the system need to adjust as well?
Not in the way that's suggested here. The question is who's going to have the authority to determine whether someone should continue on the bench. And here, under this proposition, it is largely going to be left to the Judicial Performance Review Committee and taken away from the voters. Let me give you an example. The Judicial Performance Review Commission, does a great job, but if a particular judge or justice has a particular philosophical point of view, like they're a Federalist Society judge, which I think is total nonsense, that will never get them sent for review under this. My right to weigh in on someone who's got what I can only describe as a weird view of what judges ought to do is immune from voter review.
Mr. Langhofer, what's your response to kind of the changing that we're seeing, the changing environment surrounding these judicial retention elections?
Yesterday, I saw a flyer that someone was publishing about which judges to vote for and which to vote against. And I think it said that they should vote against one judge because he'd been invited to speak to a group that the person writing this pamphlet didn't like. And he showed up and he spoke to the group. So you should vote against him. It wasn't saying that what he said was offensive or even wrong, just that He's associating with people I don't like, so you've got to vote against him. This is no way to run a courtroom. Like, judges are there to listen to all sides, collect information, share their neutral opinion. They can attend a meeting with someone you don't like and still be qualified to be a judge. What's happening with the politicization of the judiciary is a very bad path for the state.
So that leads to one of my other questions. Can judges be truly independent, truly neutral in their decision making?
If you're on the ballot and you have a controversial case in front of you and you know whoever loses is running a big dollar campaign against you, not because you're unethical or because you took a bribe or you're mistreating people in your courtroom, but just they don't like what you thought of the law, it's going to be tough. I mean, I practice mostly political cases, so controversial cases inherently. And I would be really nervous if this current trend continues. I'd be nervous about attending court with a judge that I think believes the other side will run a no campaign against him if he votes for us, even if we're right on the law. And that's not fair to my clients, it's not fair to me. Look, we've gotten this far as a state and as a country because the judges have generally been immune from this sort of pressure. The current political environment is deteriorating. It's getting worse and worse. And if we let that spread to judges, it's not going to get better.
Mr. Gordon, can judges be truly independent?
In 90%, look, I practiced law here for 50 years. As Kory knows, an election lawyer on the other side, almost that entire time. 90% of the cases, it really doesn't matter what their political philosophy is. They just make a decision. It's in those other 10% of the cases, a lot of them are election law cases, some of them are other controversial issues like the 1864 abortion ruling. And they are, I think, deciding those not based on the facts or the law, but they're deciding those on their own philosophy. I can tell you with great certainty in most of those cases exactly which judge is going to vote which way because they bring their philosophy to the bench. That's not surprising because those cases get to the court, particularly the Supreme Court, because it's not all that clear. I mean, this notion that judges call balls and strikes is just nonsense. They don't call balls and strikes. Maybe the Superior Court, the lower courts do, but by the time it gets to the Supreme Court, there's a serious dispute involved. And in those sorts of cases, they definitely bring a judicial philosophy and follow it. And that's why the governors appoint who the governors appoint. To give that review process or that retention process more political input, which is what 137 does, and take it away from the voters. I mean, the argument Kory's making is the voters are just too stupid to figure out what the hell's going on. I find that wrong.
Mr. Langhofer, 30 seconds to respond to that.
If you look at the rulings from this Arizona Supreme Court over the last 4 years, and whether they're siding with the left or the right, you wouldn't know what their own political leanings are. They ruled against Donald Trump. They ruled against Abe Hamada. They ruled against Kari Lake, shifted fees against Kari Lake. That is hardly the work of a right-wing ideological court, which is the allegation from the other side. They say, we've got to get rid of them because they're ideologues. Why are they ruling against Republicans all the time? They're doing a good job to call balls and strikes. Everyone's going to disagree. I've never lost a case and thought it was fair. But that's not true. I probably have a couple times. I'm sure Mr. Gordon felt the same way. Whoever loses a controversial case is going to have a gripe about it. The real question is, are they trying their level best? You're going to disagree with them sometimes, but if they're doing that, that's all you can ask.
Okay, I want to get to one final question for each. Our time is going quickly. Mr. Gordon, you do not agree with Prop 137. Are there other methods that you agree with to improve the judiciary system?
Justice Bales had an opinion piece where he made some suggestions regarding changes to the Judicial Nominating Commission that I think are well worth considering. There is another suggestion I heard from some judges that if a judge is not retained, that the governor can only appoint a replacement of that judge's own party. That kind of makes some sense to me. There may be some things to make it better. This is not it.
But not this. All right, Mr. Langhofer, quickly, what is at stake if this does not pass? We have about 20, 30 seconds here.
When you have a real problem in your life, usually if you end up in court, it's because you've got a divorce or a criminal case. That judge has tremendous power over you. You need to trust that that judge is going to treat you fairly, regardless of how popular you or your opponent are. This protects that independence.
All right, thank you. It is already time for closing statements, so each of you has 1 minute, and to keep us on time, we will politely jump in if we have to. So, Kory, Langhofer, you have the first closing statement.
Thanks, Danielle. Fundamentally, Mr. Gordon's worried about this measure taking away your right to vote, and that's not fair. That's not what's happening. Citizens control the judicial performance review process, and as Mr. Gordon said, that's still the driving force behind who gets on the ballot and who doesn't. When you have 30 judges, you and your neighbors don't have time to research them properly, and so in 99.7% of all of those elections, the judges have just been approved, not because they were fully researched and everyone approved of them, but because it tends to be somewhat easier to say, like, well, without a good reason, I won't vote against them. If you focus your time and attention on just the judges that may not be doing a good job, you're going to make better decisions, or you're going to have a better court system.
All right, Mr. Gordon, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
When Danielle read the summary of the proposition at the top of the show, it says it takes away the right to vote, it nullifies your vote this year, it gives these people lifetime appointments overwhelmingly, and it interjects the politicians at the legislature much more deeply in the process. Everything about that's wrong. Justice O'Connor did the state a huge favor coming up with this, and we should not just honor her memory, but recognize that this is a model. Vote no.
All right, well, this wraps today's debate over Proposition 137. And just as a reminder, Arizona's general election is on Tuesday, November 5th, and early voting starts Wednesday, October 9th. You can head to azmedia.org to see a list of upcoming debates and where you can find them on TV, radio, and digital platforms provided by our local media partners. For the full debate schedule and to submit questions for future debates, head to azcleanelections.gov. On behalf of our partners at Clean Elections, the Arizona Media Association, Reister, and Bitfire Studios, thanks for joining us.